Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a 12-month update on the Range Rover Sport, and there's been some issues. It's also failed the MOT, but it's all good now. Let's have a look. Testing. Okay, let's have a look at what's gone over the past 12 months. Before we get into the MOT issue, which it failed mid-December, I thought we'd have a look first of all at what went on prior to the MOT failure. Since the end of March, because of the COVID restrictions, the car hasn't really had much use over the past 10 months or so. It's probably been used once a week to do food deliveries, and as you know, not using the car very often, and only for a short, probably 10-mile round trip, it doesn't do the car much good. So that did have an effect on the MOT failures. But before we get into that, I'll go through a couple of issues I've had up to that point, which have been fixed. Around June, July time, I had a problem with the Bonnet latch sensor. You'd get home after a journey, lock the car, and then about half an hour later you'd get the dreaded beeping of the alarm. It's a bit more of a beep, quite annoying. You go out, open the car, and it's saying bonnet unlocked. Open the bonnet, close it again, and all was good for probably a couple of weeks, and then it'd all go off again. So I decided to replace the bonnet latch. It comes combined with a sensor, and that cost me £36.89. It was a fairly easy job to do, and there is a video on that in the playlist. So that was fairly simple fix. The second issue, and one which I'd been living with for a while, not long after I bought the car, to be honest, and why I didn't fix it before that time I don't know, but it's the coolant level sensor, and that and the bonnet latch sensor are very common issues on the Range Rover Discovery and Range Rover Sport cars. So I decided it was about time I replaced the cool tank with a sensor fitted. You can replace the sensor itself, but it's just as expensive as buying the combined unit with the coolant tank. So again, I did that job, and there is a video on that if you want to look into the playlist and have a look how I did that. It's quite a straightforward job really, if not a little bit fiddly, and I could have made it a lot easier if I'd have removed the headlamp on the side that the coolant tank is. So the cost of that for the, just have a look at my notes here, for the coolant tank and sensor combined was £21.68. So the two jobs combined was about, what, £55–60 in total, and they are DIY jobs, if not a little bit fiddly, but there we go. Okay, one more job that I did before we get on to the MOT failure, and that was the 12 volt power socket in the boot. I'd been using a electric tyre inflator to top up the tyres periodically when they needed it, and I'm plugging it in and removing the plug. The plastic surround that holds the socket in place, actually it was quite brittle and it just broke away and left the power socket dangling. Now you don't really want a dangling power socket around, do you? So I bought another one, a genuine JLR part, which amazingly enough cost £5.69, but the delivery bumped that up to £11.82, and it's a 3-minute job to fit it. So that solved that particular issue. One thing I will say before we go into the MOT is that the power sockets are only live when the engine is turned on, or for about 2 minutes after you switch the engine off. Now there is a bypass to this, which I wouldn't particularly personally do, so that the sockets are live all the time. But if anyone's interested in knowing how to do that, I can show you in a video, but it's your personal choice whether you go down that route. And now we come to the MOT. It's been a long time since I've had a car fail the MOT, and this is one of those times. As I said at the start of the video, I hadn't been using the car very often during the lockdown period, up until the MOT really, and short journeys, and part way through the year I noticed that the steering on starting the car and the first 2 or 3 minutes of the drive, the car felt stiff on turning, tight lock, and this gradually got worse, and I did a bit of googling and looking on some of the forums, and it could be any issue: problems with the steering rack, problems with these bushes, and quite a few different things it could be. So before the MOT, I asked the Land Rover independent mechanic that I use for some of the jobs to have a look at it before it went into the MOT. I didn't get a report back, but he put it through the MOT, and it came back that it failed the MOT on 4 issues. The most dangerous one, and it was a dangerous defect, is that the steering column UJ had deformed, and that's because the UJ had actually seized. Again, this is a very common issue on some of the JLR cars, which are Range Rover Sport, Range Rover, full fat Range Rover, and the Discovery models, because they all use the same lower steering arm, so I believe. So that was the one failure, the dangerous one. The other one was a CV joint had split, which is a common issue again on all cars. It happens from time to time. The headlamps were aiming a bit high, it's an easy fix, and the emissions, exhaust emissions, failed. Now that's again is due to lack of use. So a bit more detail on the steering UJ, which I'll show you in a minute, because I kept the original part. Because of the location of the steering UJ, which is quite low down in the car, it is open to elements, and unless you grease or lubricate the UJ every year, it'll dry out and you'll get the seizing of the UJ. So I hear a lot about this reading on some of the forums, and I never realised this was an issue. Otherwise I would have greased it and lubricated it periodically. I will do a video on that coming up in the near future. I have read reports about people who have had steering racks replaced and other things done, steering pump, all that type of thing, before they've located the problem, whether that's because of dodgy mechanics. You know the stories you hear. But if you do get a stiff steering on startup and it gets gradually worse, then check your lower steering column first. Okay, let's have a look at that failed lower steering column. Here we are, a genuine JLR item, and it's quite a hefty piece of kit, as you can see. So you can see there that it moves in that orientation, but not in that orientation. Let's put it in the vice and see if we can move it. Okay, there you can see it moving. It's certainly not loose, and if you see a new one, you don't need hardly any pressure to move it. Just by waggling the joint, it moves very, very easily. And if we try the other orientation, it does move, but I'm having to put considerable force into that to get it to move. And that's the part that you need to keep lubricated. Right, just before we get on to the rest of the issues, I thought I'd just do something that you may find interesting or you may find totally irrelevant, but I found it interesting. Here we have the lower part of the steering column for the Land Rover. Behind you can see my Lotus Elan S4 1968 that I'm currently restoring. And here is the full steering column out of that car, plus the UJ. If I go a little bit closer, I know that's totally different cars and totally different weights, but there is the UJ for the Range Rover Sport, and there in comparison is a teeny tiny little UJ for the steering column of the Lotus Elan. Let's just weigh them all to see what difference in weight they are. Okay, here is the weight of the lower steering column from the Range Rover, and we're looking at just over 1.4 kilos, so that's around about 3 pounds if you're in the US, just over 3 pounds. So don't forget, that's just part of the steering column. If we have a look at the full steering column from the Lotus, we're at almost exactly the same weight as just part of the steering column on the Range Rover, plus the UJ. We're looking at again just over 3 pounds. Now, I know the steering column on the Range Rover has got to be more substantial because you're talking about moving around a car that's 2.5 tons, whereas the dinky little Lotus weighs about 600 kilos, just over half a ton. So a little bit of a pointless exercise, but I just thought it was interesting to see the different weights of these things, and also the complexity of the Range Rover steering column with all its sensors. And anyway, I'll go into that at a later date because it's quite an interesting component on the Range Rover. Anyway, back to this story. The other issue was the exhaust emissions. The mechanic actually added a fuel additive, fuel treatment, and then took it out for a drive, let the car stretch its legs for a little bit, and lo and behold, it passed the emissions on the re-MOT, which it actually passed. Now, I would have tackled most of these jobs myself, but I wanted the car back and pass through its MOT, and I didn't have garage space at the time, so anyway, it passed, and that's the main thing. Okay, right, before I go into the costs I've incurred this year on doing all these jobs, there is one other job that I did have done, and that is another warning light that was on the dash, and it's been on the dash for quite a while, and that is restricted performance. When I last had that looked at, when I had the jobs done roughly this time last year, it was found to be on the diagnostics watering the fuel. Now, the mechanic actually drained the fuel filter and then reset the sensor, but after about another 3 or 4 weeks, the warning light reappeared. This again is another common issue on these cars, and just replacing the fuel filter doesn't solve the problem, because the sensor is actually in the fuel filter housing. It is a DIY job, again, if not a little bit fiddly, but Again, I had the mechanic change the fuel filter housing when he was doing the other jobs, and I haven't seen a warning sign since. The other item that was replaced was the fuel filter housing, and that's this unit here. As you can see, the fuel filter fits in there, and as I say, it can be done DIY, but it's a fiddly job. And there is the sensor, which commonly fails. So at some point in your ownership of your Range Rover or Discovery, you'll probably find that needs replacing at some point. So how much has all this cost me this year then? Okay, let's have a look. I've got to look at my notes because I'm a little bit forgetful in my old age. So the bonnet latch was £38.69. The coolant tank with sensor was £21.68, so that's a total of £60.37. The CV boot was £16.69. The fuel filter housing, genuine JLR, was £104.15. You can get them cheaper, about £68, which I'll put a link in the description below. And then the lower steering column was £136.14, again a genuine JLR item. So in total parts we're looking at £307-ish, give or take a few pence. The labour charge was £398. So in total this year, on all the things that have gone wrong on it, I'm looking at £715. Last year in total I spent £900 on having various jobs done, and you can see last year's update in the playlist. So not a necessarily inexpensive year, but these are items that will go, and they were nearly all down to sensors apart from the column, lower steering column. Okay, what else is potentially down the line in terms of faults? Well, I was driving the car about 4 or 5 months ago, and not long after I'd filled up, it had probably reached about halfway, and I was driving along on my way somewhere, and all of a sudden the fuel level indicator suddenly went red, and it pretty much screamed at me to get to the nearest fuel station pronto, saying that I was nearly out of fuel. I knew I wasn't, but it just gives you a lurch, and obviously you don't want to break down in heavy traffic, which I was in at the time. So I did just that. I went and filled up, and no problem. It went below halfway on numerous occasions, and I didn't see the sign again. But then all of a sudden just gets below halfway again on one journey, and the same thing happens. A little bit of research suggests that it's one of the fuel level sensors in the fuel tank. Now, in their wisdom, Jaguar Land Rover decided to put 2 level sensors in the fuel tank, one from full to halfway, this is how I understand it, and the other one from halfway to empty. Now, obviously in my case it was the sensor from halfway to empty that gave up the ghost. The problem is, to replace the fuel level sensors in these cars, the fuel tank has to be taken out, because the level sensors are fitted from the bottom of the fuel tank. Good one, JLR. Anyway, it hasn't happened again, but it's something that I will probably have to replace in the near future, should it go wrong. Whether it was a connection, a fault, I don't know, but it hasn't raised its head again yet. Another thing that's happened, not long after I picked the car up in early January, after having the jobs done, I got in the car, went for a short drive, and within about 2 minutes of the journey, all of a sudden all the locks started to flicker, the lock, unlock, unlock, that type of thing, and then it went silent. All the locks locked fine. Second journey I did, it did exactly the same thing, and that was about 4 weeks ago, and it hasn't done the same since. So I don't know what's going on there, but it's one that's at the back of my mind, and I'll have to keep my eye out for. Okay, before I wrap up the video, I'm just going to say that over the coming months I'll be doing a lot more jobs on the Range Rover Sport. It needs a lot of detailing, it needs some things replacing in terms of interior damage, trim, and general maintenance. Now I'm going to be conducting as much of the maintenance as I can myself, because it'll make good content, and if you have any jobs that you'd like me to particularly look at, taking into account that I haven't got a lift and most of the jobs are going to be done either out here or if I can get access to another garage inside the garage. So again, if you've got any jobs that you want me to look at potentially, please drop me a line in the comments below. As I said, I will be looking at lubricating that steering UJ, which I'll be covering in another video. Also, I'll be doing a full service on the car very soon, and I'll do a video about that and other service items as well. Now, I've actually printed out a maintenance schedule that you can download. I will try and leave a link in the description below, and that is a full maintenance schedule that I believe the factory uses for its A and B services. So I'll be looking down this and doing the service items as we go along. So there's going to be a lot more content on the channel regarding the Range Rover. So please like, please subscribe, and let me know in the comments below if you have any ideas on what you'd like to see. And thank you. Thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.